Hi, hello and welcome to my channel True Crime Before Bedtime. I'm your host Amy Jeffels and I'm here every Sunday evening at 8 p.m. to tell you a spooky bedtime story and hopefully lull you off into a nice deep sleep. This video is a little bit late. I was very poorly last week. Unfortunately, I had a bit of a flare-up of a few illnesses that I do have, so unfortunately I wasn't feeling up to recording, writing, that kind of thing. So I do apologise that it's a week late, but we got there in the end, everyone. We got there. So tonight is the second video in my Unsolved series. Again, I am in fancy dress. This was a little bit rushed. You can probably tell my hair looks a clip. Vampire Queen, that's what we're going for. Are you ready? Another top that I've bought from Primark, like the last one. Never gonna wear this again. Never. I've also got a lovely little table set up here, but you can't actually see it. We're struggling with the logistics of making the videos in this room at the moment because I don't have my desk set up, so it's a little bit weird, but yeah, I hope you don't mind, and I hope that you still enjoy the video. Tonight is the second episode in the Unsolved series. This episode tonight is the unsolved case of the murder of the Black Dahlia, who also goes by the name Elizabeth Short. So I will just pop a list in the description box. A few people send us messages like saying, oh, like, where did you get the blood tears that I had on last episode and stuff like that. So I'll just pop in the description box a couple of the little links to the items that I did purchase. I appreciate nobody wants me to tell them how to do their makeup. I'm not trying to be a makeup artist. I just mean, like, if you want to buy the different products, most of the stuff's from the pound shop. I think this is from Wilkinson's, but I thought, ooh, cute. So I will pop that in the description box as well. So I hope you've all had a lovely week so far. Like I said, I was a bit ill last week, but I'm feeling much better now. So thank you to everyone who got in touch and just said that they hoped I got well soon. I have been looking forward to this case. It is one that I've been fascinated with for a long time. And it has been ongoing for a long time too. This week's case is the case of the Black Dahlia. It's been around for a long time, like I said, and there's also, because the case is still to this day unsolved, there's also a lot of speculation going around with regards to suspects and, oh, I think this guy did it, or even with regards to the actual detectives who worked on the case. They've also had a lot to say about that as well after the fact. So it is a really interesting case, so I do hope that you enjoyed this video. So let's get down to it. So if you're not in your pajamas, pause the video, pop your gym jams on, come back and snuggle in close as we delve into our next case, which is the unsolved case of the Black Dahlia. So I'd like to talk to you about Elizabeth Short. So she was a beautiful young woman. She was in the prime of her life. You know, she was callously murdered, mutilated and left on a lawn in California, just displayed and posed in this really strange way. Short was born in Boston on the 29th of July in 1924. She spent most of her life between Boston and Florida, and then she moved to California as she was an adult. In her early life, her father lost his business during the stock market crash in 1929. And after that, he was declared as bankrupt. He lost all of the money and lost everything, essentially. After that point, his car was then found abandoned on a bridge, and it was assumed at that point that he had taken his own life, which is obviously very sad, especially when you're such a young person, to lose your father in such a tragic way. Really sad. Now, it wasn't until 1942, however, that a letter was sent from Short's father to her mother, advising her that he was in fact alive and well, and he was living in California. So, like, if you're gonna run away, like, just run away. Just tell them, like, I'm done with this, I'm gone, see you later. Just don't fake your own death. Like, what? Really? Like, no wonder this family must have just been completely messed up. I can't even imagine. So it was then that Short decided, right, I'm going to move to California and I'm going to live with my dad. So she moved to California, but unfortunately, due to a number of disagreements, shortly after that, she moved out of the home with her father, and she ended up taking a job at, like, a military base, I believe, called Camp Cook. Shortly after she moved to California, she was actually arrested for underage drinking, and she was returned to Massachusetts. However, she then just abandoned Massachusetts altogether and then went to Florida instead. There was quite a lot of relationships that Short did have of note in her life. She did have a proposal of marriage from Major Matthew Michael Gordon Jr. After he was injured after a plane crash in India. Sadly, he actually died not long after that in a second crash, which, I mean, that's traumatic enough. You know, she's been through this whole thing with her father where he faked his own death, and then now she's then losing this gentleman that she's intending on spending the rest of her life with. You know, it is very sad. After this point, she then relocated to Los Angeles from Florida to visit a gentleman called Joseph Gordon Fickling, I believe is how you say his name. Fickling. And he was actually a lieutenant in the US Air Force. Now, in the months before her death, Short was actually working as a waitress and renting an apartment near Hollywood Boulevard. Now, whenever anyone talks about Elizabeth, at least once a week I have to mess up something completely with not being able to speak. So Elizabeth. So it is always noted that Elizabeth was an actor or an actress. And while it is noted that she was an aspiring actress, unfortunately at the point of her death she wasn't actually credited with any official acting roles. So on the 15th of January 1947, a lady named Betty Bersinger was on her way to run some errands with her small daughter, who was 3 years old at the time. It was 10 AM in the morning, and she noticed what she believed to be a shop mannequin just like sort of lying on the lawn outside of a random home that she was walking past. Now, everyone, if you walk past a shop mannequin, like 9 times out of 10 it's going to be dead. It's going to be a dead person, isn't it? It's just like when I say, like, don't go jogging and don't get a dog. Don't walk your dog in the morning because you're going to find a dead body. If you ever look up someone who has been found in the wilderness, it's been found by a jogger or a dog walker. So there's the thing. That's why you should never run. Don't go for runs. It's turning into an anti-exercise campaign. Don't go for runs. Don't walk your dog. Well, at least not like on random trails. Just be careful out there, everyone, okay? Protect yourselves. But anyway, so yeah, she saw this, what she thought was like a shop mannequin, just lying, sort of not on the road or anything, but like on a lawn. So it was on like a grassy lawn in like what was described as an empty lot. So unfortunately, it wasn't until she got closer that she actually discovered it was the body of a young woman. It was then that Betty ran to a local home and asked them to call the police, and the police were alerted to the actual attack. So I am going to go into a little bit of detail now about the actual attack that had taken place on poor Elizabeth Short. It is a bit gruesome. If you do want to skip it, you might just want to skip a couple of minutes just so that you're not, triggered by any of this, because I appreciate it is kind of gruesome. And it's not nice to look at. I don't normally go into this much detail, however it does become relevant later on in the video when I discuss the suspects. So yeah, just that's basically why I've got to give you all the details. So the body had been severely mutilated. If you're aware of this case, you will be more than aware, unfortunately, of some of the mutilations that had been performed on poor Elizabeth's body. Her body had been completely cut in half, at the sort of lower torso, and drained completely of blood, so that Betty, who had found the body, had said, it was like ghostly white. That was the reason why she believed in the first instance that it was like a model of a person, because the body was so white, and it was later determined that was because the body had been completely drained of blood entirely, which does kind of make me feel queasy, just a little bit. The way that the body had been severed in the middle, the coroner said that it had been done with sort of medical precision, which led them to believe that, the killer could have been someone in the medical field. They had to have had some sort of training in some sort. It wasn't like back in yonder times, you couldn't just go on Google and be like, how to dissect a body, which you probably could now, because God, the internet's a scary place, everyone. It really is. So don't run, don't walk your dog, and don't go on the internet. No, but nowadays there's a lot of like weird forums out there that could probably teach you how to like dissect a person in half, whereas back then, obviously they didn't have the internet. So it was basically deemed that the person who had committed this heinous crime against Elizabeth Short must have had some sort of medical training, or it could have been someone who was sort of familiar with dissecting bodies, even if that was of animals. So I suppose they may have looked at people like butchers and things like that, who had that kind of training so that they knew exactly what they were doing with these bodies. Now, due to the lack of bruising around the kind of dissections that were made, because it wasn't just that she'd been cut in half, there'd also been like large portions of her flesh had just been removed and cut off. and they were never found, so Lord only knows what he did with them. But disgusting. But because there was no bruising around these kind of mutilations, it was noted that this had all been taken place after she had been tried, so that was post-mortem, so that is one sort of saving grace at least. I mean, and she did have sort of blunt force trauma to the head, so in my thoughts I was just kind of thinking, I hope to God it was kind of like one hit and then she was gone, because the mutilations that took place were just so sick and absolutely vile that I just don't think anyone should have to live through that, whether they died at the end or not. You know, it's terrible. There was also noted when they did like sort of sweep of the area that there was an empty cement bag nearby, which it was speculated that the body had been transported in because it did have some blood on it. Now, little Jeffels tip of the day, remember that, because that will come into play later on in the video. The cement bag. Mental note, cement bag. So, as I said before, the body was ghostly white because of the lack of blood, but it was also noted by the coroner that, or the medical examiner, that the body had been completely washed by the killer as well. So assuming that is to remove any kind of DNA evidence, obviously at the time it would be more likely to be fingerprint evidence, but any kind of evidence that had been left on the body, again, given this impression of this person who has committed this crime must have been very intelligent, must have been very clued up as to what to look for with regards to like anything that was going to incriminate them. This is probably the bit that sort of freaks me out the most. Short's face had actually been sliced like almost from ear to ear. I think they said it was 3.5 and 3 inches up from her mouth up towards her ears, which gave her this like constant sort of gruesome smile. Like, I know I've just seen the actual trailer for the new Witches film, basically like Anne Hathaway in that film, where she's got it's just horrible, and you know, the just garish and sort of ghoulish almost like exposure of the teeth, and just fixed in this constant terrifying grimace essentially. It was also noted that her intestines had been removed and placed under her body. Like, just in case you need them for later, I'm just gonna pop them under your bum, right? Like, what was the point in that? Like, very strange. So again, this is something that you may find quite triggering, and I do apologise. I did put in a little disclaimer with regards to the sort of contents of this case, because it is absolutely brutal. But sadly there was evidence that Elizabeth had been sort of the victim of sexual assault and rape. So this poor woman, you know, prime of her life, just starting a career, just starting to look for acting jobs, and just sort of ripped away from her life. And not only in such, I mean, any kind of murder or any kind of death is tragic enough of such a young person, but to be taken in such a sort of brutal and callous and heinous way is just absolutely tragic. It really is. It's a really devastating case, and especially because they never caught the fucker who did it to her. It really is just so sad. Now, when I was reading about this, they did state it was like the body was cut in half using a procedure from the 1930s called, now I'm about to embarrass myself, hemicorporectomy. So I was very confused by this, because I was thinking, I'm sorry, at what point at any point in life have we been thinking, oh, you know what would cure that? Cutting her in half. Yeah, I'm gonna use a hemicorporectomy, and I'm gonna slice this woman in half, and that'll cure her migraines. Like, what? Why was there a procedure for it? I'm hoping it was something to do with like a post-mortem, but I wasn't really able to find any other information about that. So I'm a bit scared about that, and I'm a bit scared about what the doctors were doing about that, but never mind. The body was actually formally identified by Short's fingerprints, because she obviously had that record with regards to her juvenile record when she was arrested for underage drinking. So on the 21st of January that same year, a phone call was made to the editor of, I believe it was the Examiner, which was a newspaper, claiming to be the killer of Short. He stated, oh, like, I'll be handing myself in shortly, like, don't worry about it, I just wanted to, you know, give the police a chance to kind of catch us first. I'm sorry, if you're gonna hand yourself in, just fucking hand yourself in now. What do you mean? I just want to give them such a sense of like worth. Just give them that, you know, that sense of accomplishment by catching me. But you're a dickhead. Like, you are enjoying every second of this. It's that narcissistic tendencies that we see over and over again in people who are, you know, killers, where it's like the fascination of reading about themselves in the press and seeing the pictures of the dead body and remembering the fact that they've taken a life, and that's what that's how they get their kicks, essentially. They're fucking sick. So he said that he would be handing himself in, and he wanted to give the police a chance to just like catch him first, because he was like, oh, just want to give them a little confidence boost. But he also advised the editor that there would be a letter arriving shortly to the editor himself. Now, at the time, and what still probably happens here, and at this time in the world as well, the newspapers would give like murderers, or like sets of murders, like nicknames almost. Would have like things like the Moors murders, the Yorkshire Ripper, that kind of thing, the Son of Sam, all that kind of thing. And this case was dubbed the Black Dahlia case, and it was reported that Short would wear black clothing a lot, and also it was linked to a film named The Blue Dahlia. I'm not really sure why it was linked to that film. I couldn't really find any information about that. I'm not sure whether that was something to do with Short herself or the murder itself. Unfortunately, I'm not quite sure about that. So it was reported that 9 days after the murder of Short, a letter had been sent to the Examiner, and the address on the, you can probably guess what I'm going to say here, the address had been written out of like cuttings of different newspapers. That's like, must be in like Kidnappers and Murderers for Dummies book, like, cut the name of the person out of different newspapers and stick them to an envelope. Like, come on, don't be so basic, you know what I mean? So yeah, that was believed to have been sent by the killer, and in the front of the letter, or the envelope, sorry, stated, "Here are Dahlia's belongings, letter to follow." Now, there was a number of items that had actually been sent, some of which, for example, were Short's birth certificate, business cards, photographs, some names written on a piece of paper, and there was also an address book in her possessions that had the name of Mark Hansen on it. Strangely, the address book there'd been pages ripped from the address book, which led to speculation that maybe the killer himself was in there. So maybe he had met up with Short, she'd taken his phone number, they'd gone on a couple of dates, and he's like, I'm gonna kill you, and then he ripped his name out to protect his identity. So that was something that was speculated. Now, after the first letter, with all of the information and the pieces of her belongings, there was roughly about a dozen more letters arrived, which would like taunt the police, like, oh, you can't catch me, mature, and then was often signed the Black Dahlia Avenger. Now, to me, Avenger, if you avenge someone, I always thought that was like a nice positive thing, like, I will avenge your death, like, I'll get revenge for you, I will avenge, and then I think, well, you fucking killed her. So I'm not really sure where that came from. That was a bit strange, but these people are fucking nuts, aren't they? So I mean, are we surprised? Probably not, everyone, probably not. The sender had attempted to remove all of the fingerprints that were on all of the items, as well as the envelope and everything as well, by using petrol or gasoline, rubbing that on, which had also been done to the body to try to remove the fingerprints as well. The police were able to lift partial fingerprints, and I've read two different things. So one said that it didn't match anyone and they couldn't find anyone to match the fingerprints to. Another piece of information that I saw said that they got lost, or they got compromised, and I was like, really? Like, this is probably one of the most famous murders of all time, and even at the time it caused an absolute media frenzy. It was crazy, the amount of people that were involved and the amount of people that were, you know, fascinated by this case, and they're just, sorry they're gone, sorry they got compromised, sauce guys, like, not fucking good enough, is it? Like, how do you get compromised? I know it still happens today, but I just think, you know, sometimes it's really difficult to trust police. And I'm not going to get into that because I'll go off on another tangent. And I mean, that's the last thing we need right now, right? So police had performed a number of interviews with different people over the course of their investigation. They'd actually interviewed over 150 men in relation to the actual murder itself. One of those men was Mark Hansen, whose address book Elizabeth had in her possession when she was murdered. Many interviews were also conducted with lots of medical students from the surrounding area because of that speculation that, you know, this murder had been committed and then the dissection was committed with such medical precision, someone had to have training somewhere. So yeah, the interview, one interview was actually performed with a man called Robert Manley, I believe was his name, who was actually thought to be the last person to see Short alive. He was actually dropping her off at a hotel in LA, and he was the last person, they did speculate, he was the last person to see her alive because after the point when he dropped her off at that hotel, nobody could confirm that they had seen her in her life. So he was the last confirmed sighting of her when he dropped her off at that hotel. So despite all of the efforts by the police, and including this included, you know, 750 investigators from multiple different agencies, tragically the case was never solved. So let's get into the suspects. Now, obviously we all know that the dodgy little bastards, there's normally, I don't want to say like, oh, if you're a suspect in a murder, you're definitely involved. But there is some people that you just look at and you just go, no, I don't like that. I'm not sure if anyone has watched I'm not sure what it's exactly called, the Chris Watts documentary on Netflix that's just airdropped. I will be covering him at some point in the future because he is one massive piece of shit. Like, this guy, I hate him. Like, he's just fucking gross, isn't he? If you've watched the documentary or you know anything about him, you'll fucking hate him because he's just disgusting. Like the epitome of evil, I would say. And there was at one point, well, there was two people in that documentary who I was just like, my man. Where the guy who lived like next door or across the road, I can't remember, was just like, he's not fucking acting right, to the police. He's not acting right. Don't like that. No, he's being weird. And I just thought, yeah, you're my kind of guy. And then there was another lady who was Shannon, who was Chris's wife, who tragically was murdered by him along with their 3 children, one of whom was actually still unborn. It was Shannon's best friend, and she rang her a couple of times. She didn't answer, and she was like, nope, not happy with this. Went round to our house and was just like, you're going to ring the fucking police and I'm going to fucking wait here until you do. Because she knew there was something not right. Same with the guy next door, that kind of thing. Sometimes you just see people and you just think, no, I don't like you. No, thank you. So we all know that, well, there's a lot of dodgy bastards out there. So obviously because of how famous this case was, there's been a lot of false confessions. There was actually about 500 people have confessed to this murder, knowing full well they haven't actually done it. So some of them, this did make us laugh. I'm not laughing at the murder in any way, shape or form, but it just did make us laugh that there was some of them were like, yes, I did it, I killed her. And then they were like, you weren't fucking born. And they were just like, yeah. I like to think that there was some sort of mental illness playing there because surely they know that would be checked. It's like, yeah, it was me, I did it. You weren't born until 1990. Oh, yeah. My bad, yeah. So yeah, there's some very strange people out there, and there has been a lot of false confessions, mostly from, I'm sure, people who've got severe mental illness or want to sort of bargain for extra privileges in prison. But yeah, so we are surrounded by a lot of odd people, guys. But I'm just going to talk you through a few of the suspects, talk you through the theories, and talk you through exactly why they have been put forward as being suspects for the murder on this case. So I've mentioned him before. Robert Manley was a suspect in the killing of Elizabeth Short. He'd apparently met her in a bus station and like offered her a lift, and she was like, no, it's fine. He was like, no, come on, get in. She was like, no, honestly, it's fine. He was like, no, come on, get in. And I was just like, this guy doesn't seem to understand the concept of, you know, consent, and no means fucking no, guy. Go away. But I suppose nobody did back in them days, did they? It was just like, oh, no means yes. Touch who you want. Don't do that. No. So after they'd sort of met and he picked her up and they'd gone out and they went out on a few dates and things like that, whenever he was in the area, there was a situation where apparently Short's accommodation had actually fallen through and she'd contacted Manley to see if he could come and collect her. They did so, and they did move in together for a short while, but Manley did state specifically that there was no romantic involvement there. It was just a strictly platonic relationship where they were just living together, just simply because it was a sort of circumstance where he could help her out, essentially, because she didn't have anywhere else to stay. After that fact, and after they had lived together for a short while, Manley claimed that he took Short to LA and he left her at the Biltmore Hotel, and this was actually on the 9th of January, so this was just before her body was found, and again, he was the last person to report that he'd seen Short alive at this point. Manley was interviewed and passed a polygraph test, so naturally he must be, mustn't be guilty, right? Like, you may as well just sit across from someone and ask them questions and go, not lying. Liar! Polygraphs are pointless. I don't really understand why they're still able to use them. Even stranger, he was also questioned whilst using, I think it was sodium pentothal, and it was a truth serum. I'm sorry, are we in Harry Potter? There's no such fucking thing as a truth serum, is there? But yeah, apparently it was determined that he was telling the truth, and there was no further investigation performed into Manley. And he actually sadly passed away in 1986. And it was actually the same date that he had left Short at the hotel, in the Biltmore Hotel, which he died from an accidental fall. So people were like, that's a bit strange that he's died like however many years later on the same date that he left her there. Could it be guilt? Or was it a suicide because of the guilt? And there's a lot of speculation around that, but unfortunately, because he's now passed away, it's unlikely that they'll ever be able to find out. If it was him, it's unlikely that they'll ever be able to prove that it was him, unfortunately. So another suspect, who actually doesn't have a name, was revealed when one of the detectives who actually worked on the original case, I believe he was actually the last surviving detective at this point, Ralph Asdell, was actually interviewed on an anniversary documentary of the, I think it was in 1997, with regards to the anniversary of the murder. He claimed that he'd found the man who killed Short within weeks of her being killed, and he said that a man was sighted driving a sedan car nearby where the body was found around about the same time that she was sort of left there. And there was also witnesses who had come forward and said that there was a man sort of waiting near this place, like loitering around. Unfortunately, as Asdell had no evidence of this, had never mentioned it before this, I'm assuming, in any kind of real sense, he was then, because he had no kind of concrete evidence at that point in time, he was unable to kind of interact with anyone and discuss this further with the subject himself. One of the most promising and compelling leads, to me at least, is a man named Dr. George Hodel. Now, George's son, Steve Hodel, was actually a long-term LAPD murder detective, and he was the one who sort of raised major concerns about his father and how he believed that he was the Black Dahlia Avenger. George was a wealthy doctor and he lived in Los Angeles at the same sort of time as the murder had taken place. He was described as sort of, well, very favourable by people who knew him. He was very handsome and he was charming, he was charismatic, and people really seemed to sort of gravitate towards him and think he was a really nice guy. While he wasn't actually working as a surgeon at the point when Short was actually murdered, he was a trained medical professional. I believe he worked in sort of like a VD clinic, as they were referred to it at the time, working with local sex workers and obviously everyone from every manner of life, because everyone has sex, pretty much. Well, not everyone, but a lot of people. So there was a lot of people coming to him for advice, for care, for medical attention, that kind of thing. So he was very well respected, but also he knew a lot of people as well. Remember that, because that'll come up later on. So because he was a medical professional and he also excelled in medical school as well, that was the sort of, remember when we said that the body had been done with medical precision? That sort of raised alarm bells to a lot of people, especially more recently. People were like, once Steve started talking about this, Steve would be Dr. Hodel's son, and people started thinking, actually, yeah, like I do think that's quite a compelling argument with regards to who we think had killed her. So after his father's death, Steve Hodel had found photographs that he actually believed to be Short in his father's possessions. Well, this obviously led Steve to believe that his father and Short could have had sort of a romantic relationship. Obviously, he was a bit of a womanizer, apparently. I don't know how, because he's rotten. But it's not on looks, Amy. It's not on looks. But he was also a piece of shit, so I'll give myself a free pass there. And there was sort of, I believe Steve had also found some information and evidence to state that they had actually been seen together at some point in LA. However, there's been no official confirmation that these pictures were of Elizabeth Short. It was just sort of Steve's speculation at that point, and he really did believe that these photos that he found were of her. So Steve, after some sort of investigation, had also speculated that his father may have been responsible for another murder, which happened only 3 weeks after Short. This lady was called, I believe it's a Jeannie. It might be Jeanne or Jean. I think it's Jeannie. Jeannie French. She had also received blunt force trauma to the head and was also posed and left in a similar setting to Short. And strangely, her body also had BD, Black Dahlia, written on it using lipstick, like around her navel, I think it was. So Steve had also hired a forensic handwriting analyst who had stated that the handwriting on the notes from the Black Dahlia Avenger and on the writing on French's body had matched the handwriting of George. Also, another aspect of the speculation as well from Steve was that, remember when I mentioned earlier that there was a cement sack that was left near Short's body with the blood in it, and they believed that had been used to transport her body. Evidence was also found that George Hodel had ordered a lot of sacks of cement to his home not long before the murder had taken place. And the type of cement, the type of bag was very similar to the ones that were used at the size of the body, with the body. So I mean, that's a strange aspect of the fact, and that is something that Steve sort of honed in on as well. And also the car that was mentioned by Detective Asdell was also very similar to Hodel's car. So there's a lot of sort of information that sort of came to light around Steve's investigation that just sort of strengthened his ideas that I think that this was my dad. I think my dad has killed these women. Tamar Hodel, who was George's daughter, she also made claims that she was asked to pose nude for Man Ray when she was a child, who was George's favourite artist. As a small child, this was. After she'd run away at a young age, and after the fact, she then said, that her father used to try to teach her about oral sex, and had offered her to his friends to have sex with when she was only 14 and God knows what. And the oral sex thing took place when she was only 11 years old. I mean, it's never appropriate to teach your children about that, but dude, come on. She also claimed that George had raped her when she was a child, and I mean, at this point I think we can all agree that this guy is kind of fucking disgusting beyond all kind of really recognition. It's just disgusting, just awful. He just sounds like he was a real piece of shit and a terrible, terrible father. Tamar had also given birth to a baby girl when she was only 15. So due to the stigma, obviously, surrounding teenage parents and things like that, there was a lot of... No, I wouldn't say it was stigma, essentially. It was sort of unacceptable for young women to have children. So at this point, it was right, well, you're going to have to put the baby up for adoption. So she put the baby up for adoption, and this poor child didn't learn the true nature of her family and what had actually happened until she was much older, and she'd actually investigated it herself. And I mean, at that point you'd be thinking, no, I wish I hadn't fucking bothered, wouldn't you? Poor sod. It had also been speculated that Fauna, who was the little girl who Tamar had given away for adoption, was the product of an incestuous rape committed by her father. So it was speculated that at that point she was being repeatedly raped by her dad, which is just fucking disgusting. Unfortunately, not only within the family but in the courts as well, Tamar's claims were not taken seriously, and after many family members sort of came forward and were like, oh, she's lying, George was acquitted on all accounts. Now, I'm sorry, I I don't understand why his family coming forward and going, no, it's not true, should mean that they're like, all right, well, off you pop. Like, do we not have to use, like, I thought we had to prove things beyond a reasonable doubt. Like, especially in America, where it's like, someone goes, he murdered someone. It's like, oh, you go to jail for the rest of your life. There's no proof, but that guy said he did. Has anyone listened to Serial? If you know who Adnan Syed is, you know what I'm fucking talking about. So I was a bit confused about this, the fact that this young girl had come forward and said, my dad's raped us, and then it was just like, sorry, your ma says you're a liar. Really? No investigation, that was it, cut short. So I think this is probably more likely the product of the fact that without George they had no money. So he was the main breadwinner. Obviously women at that time was, you know, it was like, are you of childbearing age? Yes, well, go and have a baby. And then if you hadn't had a baby, you were a spinster by the age of like, what, 14? It's just kind of gross. That's an exaggeration. But I think we all know that at that point it wasn't sort of acceptable for women to go out and get like a really high paying, powerful job. And they've obviously become accustomed to a certain type of lifestyle and thought, right, well, we can't like sort of maintain this lifestyle without his financial help. So that kind of may have influenced it. That is complete speculation, but it could be possible. That's a really fucking depressing thought though, isn't it? Dear God. So George Hodel moved to the Philippines in 1950. I mean, did he move or did he run away? Probably ran away. In the town, which was quite nearby to where George lived, not long after he moved there was a murder, a similar murder, of a woman where the body was posed and sort of left in a similar way to the Black Dahlia murder. So I mean, coincidence or is I think that's too much of a coincidence, even for me. So Steve Hodel, George's son, he'd actually visited his childhood home a while, obviously after his father had gone, and he visited with sniffer dogs and another retired detective, and the dogs sort of honed in on multiple sites where they identified that there may have been human remains near this site. Now while this doesn't obviously necessarily prove that there has been human remains there, it's definitely still suspicious, and when you've got all of these underlying themes as well, it does sort of raise questions. A soil sample also proved that there was human remains in the soil. However, from what I could find, it said it could have been anywhere from like 2 to 100 years prior. That's quite it's a long ass time. So I mean, but again, with all these underlying bits of information, it does kind of make you question, now is this is a bit fishy. So during an investigation by a reporter, a photograph was actually found of George Hodel in the case files for the Black Dahlia, which sort of means that the police were investigating him at some point. And there was also evidence that the Hodel home had actually been wiretapped, and that the police had been listening to conversations had within the home. Now, the recordings have gone, of course. However, there was transcripts of the calls and everything that was coming into the house and all the conversations and things like that. And I just want to read you this. It definitely, this exonerates him. Part of one of the transcripts reads, and this is a quote, "Supposing I did kill the Black Dahlia, they couldn't prove it now. They can't talk to my secretary because she's dead." End quote. So I mean, does that sound suspicious enough for you? I hate this guy. Like, I really just think he's disgusting. Like, he's like a piece of shit on so many different levels. Like, not only is he a terrible father, he's a rapist. He's pretty much like a pimp, pimping out his poor daughter who's a child as like some sort of sex worker. Can you call someone a sex worker who's a child? Like, I don't really know. In my mind, sex worker means it's like, well, I suppose it's not always consensual, so I suppose so. Then he's, the murders, there was like 3 murders that happened when he was like involved with these people, and it's just, no, this guy's gross, utterly gross. So I mean, even though to me this investigation, like after listening to the recording and things like that, and that would have for me started to pick up pace. We'd be thinking, right, so he's mentioning the Black Dahlia murders. He's then diddled off to the Philippines like a couple of months after we started looking into him. There's evidence, I mean, obviously they didn't check that at the time, but the evidence of the soil, the sniffer dogs, the fact that he's medically trained. The investigation was essentially just like, it was just like, well, we'll just have to close the book on that one. He hasn't done it, clearly. Are they looking at something else? Like, to me, that would have been, I would have arrested him. I mean, I know I'm slightly melodramatic, but I mean, there's a lot of evidence. I am well aware of the fact that a lot of the evidence is kind of circumstantial. However, a lot of circumstantial evidence kind of does sort of negate the whole it's a coincidence kind of thing. It's not like he was just like, oh, I was walking down that street when I went on the same night. It's like there's a lot of different aspects of this case that kind of add up to being a bit suspicious, well, more than a bit suspicious to me. So the LAPD sort of stated that he'd been cleared as a suspect, and I mean, it's strange because it's not like the LAPD are, you know, massively corrupt. But that's none of my business, and that's something for another time. But yeah, so I mean, during this time there was a lot of corruption going on, a lot of issues in LA at the time as well. So it was very, very strange. So the LAPD have more recently said that all of the physical evidence of this case has been lost, which again just kind of smacks of corruption. Because of sort of George Hotel's high standing in the community, like I said, he was a doctor. Not only was he a doctor, he worked at a VD clinic. Now, if you're not sure what VD, it's venereal disease. So that's like a GUM clinic in the UK is what we call it. And basically he treated people who had sexually transmitted infections. So no doubt he had some rather questionable patients, shall we say. Maybe he treated a policeman who was like of high standing. He was like, listen, I'm not going to tell your wife that you've been sleeping with sex workers if you do this one favour for me. So that's something that Steve kind of not really accused of, but sort of speculated the fact that he may have been able to manipulate people because of his high standing in society and his inside information that he had from working at the VD clinic. He knew who had been interacting with sex workers and things like that. So that was something that was kind of speculated by Steve, who again was George's son. So this case now has been open for 7 years, and sadly has never been solved. Unfortunately, there aren't any like real active investigations into the case at the moment that are ongoing and still looking for new evidence and things like that. And I just think it's absolutely tragic that this poor woman, lost her life and not being able to give the kind of justice to her, to her memory, and also to her family as well. Is just absolutely awful. I was reading a lot about this case obviously this week when I've been doing my research, and a familiar name did pop up and I thought, oh, I know who that is. And it was John Douglas, who was, I believe he was like the basis for one of the characters in Mindhunter. He was like one of the first people to do behavioural analysis with the FBI, and I believe he started the BSU, which was the Behavioural Sciences Unit, which is where I want to go work when I grow up. Pretty sure you have to be American. I was born on the wrong fucking continent. But yeah, so John Douglas was sort of interviewed, and he'd said that due to the time that the killer spent with the body and all of the sort of evidence that they could have collected from the body, had this happened now, the killer would probably have already been caught, and to me that is just absolutely tragic. So that is the unsolved case of the Black Dahlia. It is, like I said, such a tragic story, even more so that there's been no justice for Elizabeth. It's tragic enough that she was taken in such a brutal and heinous way, but the fact that then her family and her memory have kind of just drifted, the name the Black Dahlia, for many people, if you say the Black Dahlia, some people can't even tell you who it is. And I just think that's really sad, because obviously in the true crime community, I do think there is a lot of people who kind of glamorise it a bit. For me, that's not what this is about. I find it fascinating, not only looking at like the psychology of the people who commit these crimes, also the investigations and how efficient and effective they are. The crimes themselves, I don't like looking at gory details, and I know there was a lot of gory information in this one, so I am very sorry, but you can't really tell the story of Elizabeth Shaw without going into those details, because it was so brutal. And what was done to her, it was just absolutely awful. It is definitely a very interesting case. For me, there's obviously one clear killer. Like, it's pretty damn obvious that this prick did it, you know what I mean? George, you fucking dickhead. And I just think it's really, really sad that her family have never really been given that kind of peace to sort of lay her to rest. I mean, I'm assuming now, I'm not sure if she had any siblings, but obviously her parents would have passed away by now, but I mean, she could have still been alive today had she not been killed, and it is just really sad. If you do have any spare time this week, there is a podcast named The Root of Evil, which is about the family of George Hodel. I believe it's called The Root of Evil. I will double check that and pop it in the description. And it's definitely worth a listen because it is really, really good and really, really interesting. It's hosted by, I believe it's like his niece and his 2 nieces or something, Steve's nieces. I'm not really sure about that, but it is really, really interesting. So I really do hope you've enjoyed this video. I'm aware that I haven't actually mentioned my outfit today. I was just going for like Vampire Queen, but I mean, with a wet fringe. It's really cute. But yeah, I hope you've enjoyed this video. And I'm really sorry it's a week late. I've been a bit up and down and up and down and up and down, but I have been told off for saying sorry too much, so I'm just supposed to shout, "I'm fucking ill, bitch." Which sounds really brutal and really rude. But it is, I do struggle with quite a few chronic illnesses. Obviously, you know, I have anxiety and depression. I also have problems with my joints, which do lead to lots of chronic all over body pain. So that was what I was suffering with last week. It was a really severe flare up. So I do appreciate every one of you coming back and watching with me tonight. If you haven't already liked the video, give it a like, leave a comment. I'll absolutely love hearing from all of you. Make sure you subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to make sure you don't miss new content. Over the next couple of weeks, I am looking into starting a Patreon page, just to help support the page, obviously to support the channel with regards to, you know, research and things like that. Obviously, at the moment, it's not something that is costing a lot of money, but I know moving forward, as I'm wanting to build on what I've got already, costs do become incurred. So anything like that, I might be setting one of them up hopefully in the next couple of weeks. I keep saying I'm going to do these things, and then I'm like, I've got 400 lectures to write up and I've got 5 hours to do it in. So yeah, it has been all up and down, and I'm sorry that I missed the week, but I hope you have enjoyed this video tonight. I'm hoping one day soon I'll have a grip on what the hell I'm doing and I'll be able to go back to normal life and actually leave my house. That would be a novel concept, wouldn't it? I am currently running a little incentive on my Instagram and on my Facebook page. I'm trying to get to 300 subscribers before I turn 30. So I turn 30 in probably like 33 days now. That's terrifying. 28th of November. So I'm currently at 289, so I've only got 11 left to get. And if we get there at the end of November, I'm going to be doing another giveaway. So there's an incentive for you, y'all. I've been working with some lovely local lady who does resin designs and does some amazing products as well. So she's been generous enough to give me something. I'm going to pop her link to her Instagram page in the description notes as well, just so you can have a look at her stuff, because she's really, really good. So I hope you all take care of yourself. Please stay safe and healthy, and I hope you have sweet dreams, and good night.